Welcome to another Pi Crowdcast. I'm Rick Tarosi, co-founder and general manager of Pi, and I'll be your host. Today's conversation is with Pi alum Quincy Brown. We'll be talking about all kinds of different aspects of equity and inclusion, from the way we plan our startups to the way we plan our cities. Please join us for this super informative discussion with Quincy, and thanks again to him for making the time to have this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, so my name is Quincy, and I recently graduated from Claremont McKenna College. And at Claremont McKenna, I focused on race and sustainability, and so looking at kind of how to redevelop the urban space to be more equitable for people of color, particularly. And so I looked at kind of LA, Oakland, and Portland as case studies to understand how different transportation agencies and policies have either helped gentrification or are kind of the reason gentrification is happening. And so as I've kind of developed the case study, I looked at this ideas of human rights within urban cities and how different policies are able to support human rights, and kind of develop those case studies as I moved back to Portland. And so I've kind of worked in a lot of different planning spaces, landscape architect spaces, kind of more farming, urban spaces in different regions kind of around the West Coast. And now my focus is kind of looking at how to do transportation-oriented development in Portland that actually adds to the urban space for people of color. So how to create, community centers, how to create transportation spaces that actually access the downtown core, and create new ways of experiencing Portland that will entice people of color to move into the city, because we've definitely seen a lot of displacement to different regions. And so we're trying to now figure out how to include people of color in the planning development of Portland.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you. So we were kind of talking about it in the green room. It's really kind of this tale of two cities, right? Like conversations that weren't happening at all or were very difficult to get going suddenly have more room to be had at this point in time. How have you seen the dynamic of your work change in the past few weeks?
Yeah, definitely. Well, before I think it was kind of an uphill battle. I'm usually the only Black person in the room when I have these conversations. And so to have a conversation about the ways in which planners and developers have led and kind of the charge that is creating these issues that we're dealing with today can be really hard when you're talking to someone who's been working at their institution for 20, 30 years. Um, I think now we're starting to grapple with the fact that it's these same people that have been working in those spaces have created these planning and development options that are not sustainable for people of color, particularly. And so I think that they're trying to grapple and try to understand how they can be better. And I think with that understanding, they're leading to ask the right questions, and be open to the right solutions that are coming from those communities instead of kind of implanting their ideas onto those communities. And I think that's the biggest difference that I've seen, is that we're now being open to being allowed at the table. Before, I think that there was more of a, let's reach out to you and see what you think, and then maybe we'll bring those ideas to the table. So I've definitely seen a lot of options for younger people of color to be able to enter into those spaces and actually feel like they can provide their feedback and have that feedback be listened to.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we have seen time and time again this behavior of we already made the decision, we're just bringing it to you post decision to get approval. And it's good to hear that those conversations are starting to happen earlier. I've been talking to a lot of startup founders, obviously, as I do, and a lot of folks who are kind of grappling with this new reality and wanting to more rapidly implement changes. I think one of the challenges with founders of startups is they're used to being able to act very quickly and very decisively on issues, and some of them are really struggling with like the longer, this is a lot of work and it's going to take a long time to do this work. What advice do you have for startup founders or startup employees who are interested in being more proactive and active in this kind of work?
Yeah, so I can kind of give two answers. One's from previous experience in my own startup. So I used to run this startup called Sagey's Bridge. It's an
Mhm,
educational technology company for children with autism and developmental disabilities. And so what we did is we created a pedagogy. And so we looked at the type of users that we were trying to serve and what were their general problems, not
mhm,
just within education, but how they are actually able to develop through the entire space that they're interacting with. So in their families, when they're transporting themselves to school, when they're actually at school, and then kind of the public realm after they've able to like leave school. And
mhm,
so what we found is that it's important to look at kind of the least common denominator when you're working in a space, either that being trying to access a space or trying to get more equity into a space. So that
mhm,
can go in two fronts. Either you're trying to hire more people of color, or you're trying to hire people that are from an equity background, or you're trying to increase the access of the customer base that you have that might be more of an equitable background. And
mhm,
so when you're creating this pedagogy, you want to look at the users and the people that are actually creating the product. If you have people that are creating the product that are actually from that user group, for example, like we had a lot of people that had autism help us develop our product, then it actually is able to effectively be used by those users in a better way. But I think it takes intention, and it takes you kind of have to start small. And so the beauty of a startup is that we're at the beginning. And so if you're able to create a strategic plan for equity and inclusion at the beginning, then you're able to not have to do the work, 10 years down the road. You've already created that framework. And so I think it's really important as startups that we ask those questions now, but we put in those strategic plans and we put in those frameworks now so that when we grow, we're able to withstand the development of society, because 20 years ago we weren't necessarily having these conversations, but now we are. And so we need to be prepared for the 20 years in the future when we're going to be having conversations that are nowhere near what we're dealing with right now.
yep, yep. Um, what are some of the, like, can you dive a little deeper into some of that pedagogy or kind of, it sounded to me like almost persona development
Mhm.
from from a software world.
Yeah, so I kind of learned this back at YABW, which was a high school summer camp. They taught us about how to create an actual persona for your company. So, we had Stefan Seiji, who's actually a person. He has autism. He's my co-founder's brother, and we were able to utilize the issues that he goes through a day for us to plan. And now, not everyone has opportunity to like get someone who is in that background that actually exists. But I think what you can do is kind of start theorizing what they experience every day. So instead of kind of taking the what are they going to buy, are they going to buy my product, go further in and understand where do they live, who do they hang out with, what is their day to day, and like how is my product going to improve their day to day, and how are they going to access it through their individual spaces that they're entering every day. I think that's the important part. And then you really need to create an equity framework when you do that. I think we just think like people like ourselves are going to want to participate in our businesses, but we need to go a little bit deeper and think about who's the entire system and what does that system kind of include. So maybe it's someone that looks like me, maybe it's someone that looks like you, maybe it's someone that looks like other people that we're not necessarily bringing into the table. And I think that that's when you need to have more equity within your group of the people that are developing the product. And so that comes from hiring. And so if you're looking for a co-founder, maybe it's a co-founder of color who's a woman. If you're looking for a tech integrator, maybe you go on Handshake and you try to find the historically Black college group and you recruit in that area. And so it's really about being intentional to make sure that you have the most amount of people at the table when you're developing your product so that it can actually reach the group that you're trying to reach.
Yep. One of the things that I've been so thankful that mentors have taught me is a lot of the work is showing up in community. Like instead of expecting community to come to you, go be part of the community. Do you have any advice for folks at a time like this where it's much more difficult to like be present in a community? Like how should we be doing that work?
Yeah, so a lot of these committees on the city, they have public options. So you're able to open up the Zoom call as the public and participate, and they have
Mhm.
public comment. And in a lot of these meetings that I've gone on, no one from the public is there to comment and talk about what the issues are, and that's how we form our discussions. So we have our agenda, but we have like 20, 30 minutes set aside for the public for us to understand like where is the public here and how they feeling about what we're doing. And most of our agendas are also open for the public too. So going to those council meetings, going to those city meetings, and actually being able to voice your opinions as the public is a really good way of understanding how the community is feeling, and then you're actually able to utilize that information that you've gotten from that discussion and go back to your community and work on that issue or continue to bring it back for an agenda item next month. And so if there's not that public integration, it's really hard for Metro or City of Portland to actually work with the community. We kind of need to it's a two-way street. They open up their committees to the public. We as the public need to go to those committees so that we can understand what's going on and be active participants in the process.
And I know that can be a struggle for startups that are kind of like strapped for time. You know, maybe they don't have someone in a role that is able to make the meetings or spend that kind of time. Are there other ways to facilitate that behavior, or do you suggest that like just start somewhere and kind of figure it out from there?
Yeah, I think starting somewhere. I had a really good conversation with a lawyer a couple of months ago that said, as startups, we actually need to enter into the community and learn about the community and sit on these committees. We are trying to service the community. We're creating products for the community. We're creating services. If we're not in the community and actually learning about what they are dealing with every day, it doesn't inform correctly what we're trying to do to serve them. And so I feel like we really need to have those frameworks set in our business to sit on that committee and put the time aside. I think that's what's really helped me is I've met so many community members who have children with autism, and it wouldn't have been if I didn't sit on these communities and have these conversations with them had I met these people. And it's been able to inform a lot of the work that we do instead of thinking that we're on this ivy tower and we have all the answers. We need to go into those spaces and understand how we do this, and it's part of our process. Going out and having consumer feedback is in the startup process. What better way to do that? It's almost killing two birds with one stone, being an active member of your community but also learning about what the community needs from your startup standpoint.
I love that. Yeah, it's almost like the lean startup canvas mentality, but
Mhm.
from a policy standpoint, right? Like how do you engage in that?
Yeah.
Um, well, Quincy, you and I could sit here and talk all day about this. I'm noticing some questions rolling in, so I want to make sure that we're getting folks' questions answered. If you do have a question, make sure and use the Ask a Question button down there at the bottom. And even if you don't have anything to ask, feel free to pop in there and upvote the questions you would like to see us focus on. Let's get started with this question. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Pi and Quincy, for doing this session. I'm currently doing a lot of soul searching around reparations. I'd love it if you could share your thoughts about how you see the relationship between equity and reparations and any thoughts you have on those reparations occurring in tech.
Yeah, I mean, I think reparations is a really hot topic right now, and it kind of has been for the past 10 years. And I've grappled a lot with this kind of decision as well, because how do we address the inequities that we've developed over a period of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, no access to mortgages, like segregational based job placements. There's a lot of things we have to unpack, and it's really hard to understand how do we effectively address those concerns without recreating the problem and the power dynamic that has led us there. And so I think often we think as the Black community that we need to take back power. But when we take back the power, we're actually recreating that power dynamic. Now that we have power, someone else doesn't have power. And if we're looking to create equitable spaces in society, we all need to have the same access to resources and power. And so I think with reparations, it's a really fine line of how do we address these concerns that are historically creating people to not have the same access to resources without recreating the system. And so I think in tech, it's really important that we open up the discussion and not necessarily have someone enter into a diversity job, but it's like if they have the ability to be a software engineer and they happen to be a person of color or a woman or a queer person, they need to be in that software engineer position. They don't need to be in the diversity inclusion position. And I think that's the key to reparations within tech is expanding those job qualifications so that people of color can actually ask them. When I have conversations about accessing planning jobs, a lot of people are like, you need to get a master's. And then I have to talk to them about, as a person of color, we don't necessarily have access to getting a master's. It's already a feat to get us to undergrad. And now we're in this debt. We have less options when it comes to jobs. And so now we're putting on this other barrier to entry. And I think that that's the issue with a lot of these spaces, that there's so many barriers to entry. One way that we can look is taking away those barriers and offering training opportunities and on the job like work so that people can actually learn how to enter into those spaces. And we don't have pipelines anymore. A lot of older people that I talk to, they really say that, I started at an internship and I was able to develop myself into this high level position. That is not the same opportunity that young people have. We're competing against people that have masters, have PhDs, and like we just want to be a part of the system, but we don't have that ability anymore. We don't have the same opportunity as our parents, and it's really showing in the college debt that we have, or the depression that a lot of young people are feeling right now, or just in the inability to actually access and plan their spaces, be it tech, be it planning, be it business, be it kind of anything that we're trying to be a part of.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Next question is, how can we measure the success of startups' equity and inclusion initiatives? Thinking outside the bounds of we have X number of people of color in our company and other traditional metrics that folks have used to gauge this activity in the past.
Yeah, I think that it's twofold. I think one is looking at your customer base. Are there people of color accessing your products and your services? I think we often think, how can we hire more people of color so that we can check these boxes and ensure that we're having equitable space? However, there's also retention. How long are people staying at your organization and actually wanting to participate and feel comfortable? And how are you getting them to be able to expand into other spaces in your company? I think about a lot of opportunities that my parents were afforded kind of in their development. They might have stayed at one organization for 10 years, but they've had 4 different job titles. And being able to expand themselves into other spaces and grow within the company, I think that's how you really have achieved equity inclusion, where someone feels comfortable staying there. They're able to develop themselves into different spaces. Maybe they're taking that executive management course at PSU because they want to expand and they want to grow within the company and they like where they are. But if they only stay for 6-7 months, do you have a problem? You don't have the right services, you don't have the right opportunities for the people that are there. And my biggest thing is, do not hire someone until you're ready to bring them on and there's support for them. And there's a group of people that you've established that are there. So that's why I think it's really important as startups, when you have 3 or 4 employees, you're able to start bringing on those people in the beginning so you don't have to worry about these issues down the line. I think a lot of people are having discussions are about now our companies are so huge, how do we actually access people of color in these spaces, and how do we get them to stay when they could be the only person in their entire department that looks like me?
Right. Right. And when they've spent years developing a homogenous culture that is not terribly welcoming to anybody who
Mhm.
falls outside of that purview, I think it's incredibly um, difficult to reverse engineer that kind of stuff for sure.
Yeah, and then you're kind of asking the people of color to do the work,
Right. Right.
and ask the questions and critique the culture that's being developed. And that's really hard, especially if you're, hey, say you're starting your first entry job and you now realize there's these issues, and you learned and you've been experiencing this from a life standpoint, and you know how these issues affect communities, and now you're having to risk your job or risk your livelihood to bring up these issues and hope that the company is just going to change them. But if they don't, now you're the odd one out, and you're also the person of color. So it's this double entendre of trying to fix something from the inside, but then also know that you're participating in that development of change. So if you're the only person there, you're going to have an uphill battle. But if you have other people around you who will support you and talk about it from their background, and maybe it's a little bit different, they're able to,
Mhm.
the executives are able to understand, okay, this is not just a you issue, this is a community issue or a system issue that I need to address and I need to fix from the inside of my company, not just with my relationship between you and I.
Mhm. Yep. Well, and I have heard, you kind of talked about there's the hiring issue, there's the corporate culture issue. Like, am I welcome? Do I feel like this is a place for me and people with my experience? And then the other aspect that I've heard a lot about, specifically in Portland, is the broader community issue of, maybe we're a Black family who relocated to come to Portland, and the one person employed may have some social dynamic there, but the community as a whole, the family might feel out of place in the community because it's not obvious where their peers or other community members are. So we have that dynamic too.
Yeah, and it's really hard in Portland because the communities of color are so separated and displaced that
Hmm.
they're, if you go to Oakland or LA, you know what community to enter in to feel a part. And you are kind of guided through that process as you get your job and decide where to move, and there's people of color in the organization to help you and hang out
Hmm.
with you on the weekends and teach you where you need to go to feel comfortable in that space. But in Portland, we don't have those spaces, nor do we have the community as robust as we, other cities do. And so I always find myself, when I have friends who are wanting to move to Portland that are people of color or from equitable, underserved spaces, I really try to bring them in and show them that there are spaces for this. It may be small, but we're mighty, and we need more people to be involved in the process so that we can continue to ask these hard questions. Oregon has a very stark racial history that I don't think that we talk about.
Yep.
And it was built on the idea of exclusion. One instance that I bring up is that I grew up in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, and the deed to my home says that Black people can't live there.
Right.
And
Yep.
the neighborhood ordinance circa 1970 said that Black people couldn't live there. And so to have spaces in the city that have that history, we need to talk about that, and we need to decontextualize that and understand why, there's a beautiful treescape in Laurelhurst, but there isn't that same treescape in North Portland.
Hmm.
And there's pollution-based issues in North Portland that people in Southeast and inner Northeast do not face. And there's a reason why the 205 freeway runs where it does, and there's a reason why there's a Columbia Slough. And
Hmm.
so those climate-based, environmental-based issues create health inequalities in our spaces, and that leads to people feeling less comfortable and feeling like they should not be living there. And
Right.
so I have to make the decision every day. Do I want to live in a space where I'm not one of only, or do I want to live in a space that's healthy? And we shouldn't have to make those decisions as people of color, but we are. And so I think a lot of this movement that's happening right now, we're able to actually decontextualize those problems and understand that, I always say this: planning is the problem, development is the issue. And
Hmm.
like, we as planners need to dive deep into our history and why we've developed these systems and how we can actually make them better. And that's what's going to allow for tech companies to have people of color in a space to hire. But if you've put yourself next to a factory in Gresham because that's where the cheapest housing is, and now you're having to deal with all these health inequities, and you have to get on the 84 freeway to go into the city, and you have to pay for a car, that's adds to the problem. And then if you're only making minimum wage, how are you supposed to live? And these are conversations that, I've been having as a planner of color for the past 4 or 5 years, but the planning field is just now having these conversations. And
Hmm.
the tech community is just now having the conversations that it's an all white crowd, it's boys club. And we
Yeah.
really need to look at how we can develop these spaces so that people can actually feel comfortable applying for that software developer job.
Yep. Yep. You touched on it. I just wanted to get, if you're comfortable, get your opinion on, I-5 and the Rose Quarter demolished the original black neighborhood in
Yeah.
in Portland. How do you feel about efforts like Albina Vision? Like, is that starting to move in the right direction, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit too late.
Hmm.
I like to compare Irvington to the I-5 corridor and kind of where people of color were living.
Hmm.
Irvington was able to historically zone their neighborhood before this I-5 development happened. And so they were able to keep their parcels of land to ensure that there wasn't a displacement of the housing, and city officials couldn't use eminent domain to take their land. However, in places like where my parents grew up, they necessarily didn't have those options of historically zoning their neighborhoods
Hmm.
to fight eminent domain. And I think that people forget that there used to be beautiful Black-owned homes on the Willamette waterfront in North Portland, and that was where the wealth of the community was. And people owned their homes, and they had to fight because they were not able to get mortgages. They had to enter in predatory loan agreements to be able to access that space and fear getting kicked out of their homes every month. But people fought through that and they began to own their homes. But then city officials realized that, and this is every I-5 corridor development in the city. Oakland is the
Hmm.
same, LA is the same. Those freeway developments cut through Black communities, and people use eminent domain to take that wealth out and then didn't put that wealth back into the community. They put it into spaces like Laurelhurst and Irvington and Alameda
Hmm.
that were able to fight off the development of 84. And so 84 went through Sullivan Gulch, which was another predominantly person of color community.
Hmm.
And there used to be a stream there, but they were they didn't have that same access and those access of resources and political power to fight against that. So when I think about the albino vision, I think it's an amazing opportunity. However,
Hmm.
the people of color live in Gresham, in Hillsborough. They don't live in the city anymore. And so it's amazing that we're doing this, and it's amazing that we have this opportunity. But in the 60s, they were doing very similar things. There was cooperative developments, there was a community land trust, but there was not a development from the city, and there wasn't money given to those communities. um, and now there is, but that's not where the people live. And so I've also have to ask myself as a planner, does it even make sense for me to be working in Portland trying to increase diversity and equity? Or should I be moving out to Gresham and Hillsborough where all these people are actually living now and actually
Hmm.
make it so they can create community and not get displaced further out from the city? Because that's what's going to happen. As we grow as a city, these spaces like Portland are going to be unobtainable to anyone. And then we're going to have to go further and further out. But then that's going to further encourage people of color who don't necessarily have the same access to education and college and resources that other people have had traditionally. And they're not going to be able to keep their homes, keep their apartments. Their rent's going to go up. The property
Mhm.
taxes are going to be unable, they're not going to be able to pay their property taxes to the point where they're displaced from their communities. And I think that's the biggest thing that we've seen in the Albina district is that it's not that people didn't own their homes, not that they didn't have the money, but the way that our tax system is structured in Oregon is that property taxes increase with the development of land. And so when you put in Vancouver and Williams and you add this business development, you're now raising the property taxes of these areas as well. And a lot of people who are maybe on Social Security who have retired, and that's their only way of funding themselves, they can't afford their property tax increase.
Right.
And so they have to sell their home. And that's how gentrification is developed in an Oregon space. And now we're seeing that same thing happen. And so it's just hard for me to realize and grapple with the fact that Albina district is a thing now, but
Mhm.
it's for who? Like, is it actually serving people that look like me? Is it actually serving the community that used to be there? Are they involved in the process? Are they sitting on the committees? Or are they actually in the planning departments? Because most of
Yep.
the time they're sitting on these committees, they're getting paid $100 a month, and they're providing their knowledge. But at the end of the day, it's the same planners that are developing that space that developed it 20 years ago.
Right. Yep. Thank you for that insight. I really appreciate it. This question, while it's not at the top, I think kind of riffs off of that same topic. Which transportation and planning equity initiatives seem most promising right now, especially in places like Portland? Either ones already underway or ones gaining momentum. As a small business owner, I want to know how I could support more local initiatives that enable more equitable cities.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's two things that are happening. One that's already happened is the low income fare at TriMet. So that's revolutionary. Most cities do not have that. And they also don't combine it with a pass like the Hopper, which allows for you to only pay the amount of money that you would pay a month for a bus or max pass. And once you've gone past that point, it's free. And
Mhm.
so you're not having to pay every single day $5 a day because you don't have the $100 to spend on a max pass, because not everyone can put up $100 at the beginning of the month. However, someone who's spending $5 a day for a day pass, they can actually afford that $100 a day once they've written enough. And so that itself is creating equity in our regions, and transportation is the key. Now, if I live in these spaces that are far from downtown, I can hop on a max. I know it's not going to be more than $100 a month, and I can enter into downtown. I think another thing is Metro's transportation bond. I'm currently on Metro's Committee on Racial Equity, and we've been working really hard on developing the transportation bond, and that has an equity lens attached to it. So what Metro has done is they've looked at these spaces that are historically underserved, and they've used their equity analysts to understand where are these people living that need the most help and access to our city. And they're creating these urban downtown spaces where instead of having to get all the way to downtown for the same type of job that could be also in your neighborhood, they're developing the workforce and businesses to create those spaces in your neighborhood. So you're cutting down on your transportation costs, you're cutting down on your healthcare costs, and you're
Mhm.
cutting down on a lot of other costs associated with going back and forth on a freeway to work. And so I think really looking into that transportation bond. I think it's really
Mm.
cool. Like working on 82nd corridor, we're working on the Southwest corridor project. We'll actually be extending a max line to Tigard. We're working at faster buses and electric buses that'll lower the amount of smog and diesel that is happening in these neighborhoods. So it's particularly the 82nd corridor, I think is a great opportunity to do this. When I go on runs, it's a lot safer for me to run in the tree-lit neighborhood of Laurelhurst than it
Mhm.
is for me to run on 82nd and Gleason, because the smog that's coming from the buses and the cars is lowering the ability to get oxygen. And so to have like active transportation and electric buses and roads that are actually not going to cause like harder maintenance issues for you is going in the right direction. And I think this transportation bond, we're investing over $5 billion in our transportation system over 20 years. That's more than LA.
Mhm.
And we are a smaller city than LA. And
Mhm.
so it's going to really address those livability concerns that we have. And people are going to be able to actively transport themselves from Gresham to downtown, and they've never been able to do that before. And so I think that's a really great opportunity for transportation planners to recontextualize. There's an anti-displacement framework within that bond.
Mhm.
That's revolutionary. No other transportation agency that I've seen is looking at anti-displacement in their transportation development. And so I think that we're really trying to rewrite those wrongs as a metropolitan region and realize that our I-5 development was not right. Some of our opportunities that we've done and light rail might have displaced people. And we've done that. Now let's look at how we can be better and actually rewrite those wrongs through this bond.
And maybe for folks who might not be as familiar, can you just give a brief intro to Metro, because it's a unique governmental
Yeah.
body that Portland has?
So Metro is one of I think it's the only metropolitan regional government structures that is actually the council is voted on by the citizens. And so we have Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas County are in a co-op, and they're doing planning and development as an entire system to ensure that the region is meeting these equity and inclusion frameworks. So they take care of parks, they take care of transportation, they take care of our trash, they take care of our utilities. They are the regional planning of our metropolitan region. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. They don't realize that there's this other governmental agency that's not the city of Portland, that's not the city of Beaverton or city of Hillsborough, that has a council that you can vote for, and they actually have the money. And they give the money to places like PBOT and TriMet and the county to be able to actually do their work. And a lot of those Metro Council people have run unopposed because people in the region don't realize that that is where we're getting our funding, and that's how our planning is developed. Metro creates a lot of these bonds. They did the housing services measure recently, and they distribute the money to the other regional spaces, nonprofits, businesses, governmental organizations to be able to actually do their work. And so really focusing on Metro and understanding what Metro is doing is really where the region is moving towards. You know, we can get mad at the city of Portland, we can get mad at TriMet, we can get mad at the port. However, they're getting their money from Metro. And so we really need to look at how we develop the metropolitan region, because that's what's going to make it sustainable for someone who is unable to access downtown. If they have a light rail in Gresham and affordable housing and options to have work, they can participate in the region just as much as someone who maybe lives in Irvington that has access to a job and transportation in downtown. And so that's what Metro's goals are, and they're leading the charge when it comes to racial equity and actually having it go through every aspect and department of their work.
Cool. Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, what resources would you recommend that founders read, listen, talk to about creating a framework for equity and inclusion in their companies? Are there resources available that can help with that work?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I mean, there's a really great book called Overcoming Our Racism, A Journey to Liberation. And it is a book, it's very accessible, it's not academic. There's actually exercises. At the end of each chapter, you read a story that puts you in a mindset to make you a value-based decision about someone based off of their color. And then you go through an exercise at the end of the book and you decontextualize that value-based decision. And you realize why you're asserting value on one community over the other. And it's a really great opportunity for everyone to decontextualize their privileges and also their discriminatory practices that we as people just have inherently. I will admit that I also have issues where sometimes I make implicit biases and judgments on the people. But I've really tried to do the work and do the labor and be open to understanding and differences and people that come from different backgrounds than me. And I really try to learn and understand where they're coming from before I make an assumption about who they are. Because I think we fail that there is this whole history of a person before they have make an assumption or a judgment. And that history could be, they might have had a really bad day, or their parent could have just died. And now they're having to, be a person in society, and they might not say that right thing all the time. But we need to understand where they're coming from and realize that most people come from places of positivity and good, and they're not trying to hurt someone. But if we make those value-based judgments on them based off what community they're coming from, then we're going to assume they're trying to hurt someone. And so this book is such a great opportunity to recontextualize ourselves, to be more open to different people from different experiences, and just really understand what positions that we are in society, how is white supremacy developed, and why is it a thing, and how can we as a society, as a community of humans, be able to decontextualize these systems of oppression that have led to people trying to fight for their liberation.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question. How would you recommend mobilizing young people, specifically people of color, to feel empowered to start a company of their own or develop these solutions? Like where do you look for that sort of inspiration?
I would just say find a problem.
Mhm.
Everyone says that millennials and, the new generations, we are the problem solvers. We are having to deal with the society that is here. We had access to the internet. We had access to social media. We have access to all these systems that, frankly, older people have not had access to, and we know how to use them. So we're actually a leg ahead when it comes to being able to access those tech-based researches that a lot of people don't have. And so my biggest thing is saying, find a problem that you're passionate about and try to create a system-based solution. So don't just solve the problem face on, figure out where the problem is coming from and how you want the problem to not exist anymore, and understand every facet of what's creating that issue so that you can effectively create the problem. Because I feel like with startups and young people, we're being told that we need to go get a career or we
Mhm.
need to go get more, academic, whatever. We don't need that. Like, we just need to do the thing that we want to do and just get it done. And I think if you don't have that mindset, you're going to keep thinking, well, I'm too young, I'm too black, like I don't have the resources to do this. I need to just go get a job and work, in that space. And then once I can have the resources and the job prospects, in 20 years I'll start a startup. But in 20 years, our problem is going to be even bigger problem, and you're going to need way more people to solve it. So it's easier right now as a young person to find that problem, get a group of people that are, don't have a job, are unemployed, can't access the space right now because of the society that we're in right now, and
Mhm.
create your own company, because there are so many opportunities through RFP, request for proposal programs, through Metro, through the city of Portland, for Black POC businesses to actually get a leg up in the contracting process.
Mhm.
And if you are able to certify yourself as a Black owned business or a Latino owned business, an emerging owned business, a woman owned business, you're actually given a leg up in the RFP process, and you're able to actually access those funds a lot easier. And a lot of people don't realize that. And so there are systems in place to help people like myself and other people that might be on this call that are young people of color that really want to get there. And so, reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. I'd love to talk to you. Love talking to young entrepreneurs, especially of color, that want to understand how they can access these spaces and who to talk to. Because really, like, I didn't know Rick existed until I was involved in the PSU Accelerator, because Angela Jackson connected me to Porn Incubator Experiment, because I've been working in that space for 3 years at PSU, and the natural progression was to go apply to Pi. But I didn't know that, because if I didn't have those resources, I wouldn't have known that. So I'm happy to show you those people and introduce you to those people so that like, hey, like, I talk to Juan over at PSU if I go to PSU, and he'll get me into the accelerator. And then, hey, maybe I apply to the Eventual grant, and that gives me $5,000 to develop my business. And then I'm accessible and open to applying to Porn Incubator Experiment. And then maybe I go to Ben Venture and I grow my startup. There's a pipeline, but we don't necessarily know about it. And so feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Quincy. What aspects of white supremacy culture do you see showing up in tech startups?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think, and it's hard because my intro to tech culture is Pi, and it's not that. It's very diverse and open. So I definitely have a skewed perspective of the tech world. But I think, like, having gone to college in LA and spend some time in the Bay, the biggest thing is just the culture itself of studying CS. The biggest thing I'll say is that, when I look at my friends who were doing CS and finance and were doing more humanity-based things, my friends who were doing humanity-based things in college were also working. And like, they didn't have the time to be able to commit to the 10, 30 hours a week you need to do your intro CS class. They had to worry about paying their tuition. They had to help their parents. There was all these other things. And so there's, with tech, the way that we've structured the computer science space is that you have to have time, and you have to spend a lot of time to learn how to code. Myself, I'm learning how to code, and it's taking forever for me to learn how to do this. And if it wasn't for coronavirus, there is no way that I would sit and spend 30 hours on my computer trying to understand why Python is not working right now. And so if I had to work 30 hours a week on top of taking a 4-course load, and then also try to do a CS class, it's impossible. And when you look at, like, retention in STEM, I have a friend who was in a fellowship program with me who looked at minority retention in STEM, and he found that the reason why people of color don't stay in STEM-based things is because it takes so much time, and we're often the only ones in these classes. So it starts at the education. Like, people like me need to go study STEM and go teach it, because then it's going to open up the classroom culture where I'm going to know, yes, like, you might be having to work, and I'm going to give you extra time to turn in your coding assignment, or I'm going to make it a due date suggestion, and maybe it's due at the end of the quarter, and you can still get it done if you have to go do something different or you have to work. And that's really important when you're looking at those type of frameworks.
Yep. Thank you. I got a couple more. How do we go from seeing people of color as new assets because of recent equity traction to understanding that people of color have always been an asset, and treating folks as genuine collaborators rather than some new commodity to help correct previous wrongs?
That's a really awesome question. Thanks, Maris. And Maris and I are actually working on a project through PBOT called the Healthy Businesses Permit. and it's a permit for businesses that have restaurants or retail spaces that are able to open up the parking area and the streetscape to actually be able to socially distance sit or show like sell their wares. However, Maris and I are working on that project for free. We are not getting paid. We're just doing it as a volunteer space. And that's the issue, is that we're told as young people, especially young people of color, that we need to walk through all these hoops, take this master's program, and then we can participate in the development of our community, which I think is a little problematic. You know, we grew up here. We spent our entire time trying to understand why what happened when we were younger happened to us. There should be a framework and a possibility for us to actually participate and get compensation for our participation.
Yep.
And that's not the framework. And so I think it really takes hiring people that are young, that are people of color, in positions that that they can do, even though they might not have that master's degree. They can do it. And you need to take a chance, because they're going to create innovative solutions to these problems, where they're going to actually create a pathway for the next young person to be able to enter into that job. I think a biggest opportunity that I see kind of in my own personal life is I'm now on the Laurelhurst Neighborhood Association. As I mentioned earlier, Laurelhurst was exclusatory towards Black people. So to have this opportunity as a young Black person from my neighborhood to sit on this neighborhood association, I'm now creating a pathway to get other people of color that are from this neighborhood to sit on this neighborhood association and decontextualize these problems that we face as a neighborhood. We need to do the same thing in tech. We need to do the same thing in business. And it's only because the neighborhood saw the potential and they kept bothering and reaching out to me saying, join this neighborhood association. And I did. So now I'm actually being able to participate in a Safe Routes to School program. We're talking about, if we're going to even keep our arches up now. We're going to be writing a news article about our neighborhood and our historical issues that we have. But now I get to be at the framework of that, because I worked and unlearned and understood the history that I was placed in. And someone took a chance on me, and now I'm in this position, and now I'm able to lead and support the white people on my neighborhood association that really want to be involved and really want to decontextualize our neighborhood, but they don't have the experience or the knowledge or the historical know-how to do it. But they're willing to bring someone into that space and help them and get them to be involved, which I think is really key.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, last question, and this one hopefully can be a pretty quick one. What are your thoughts on how the work from home capabilities that we're seeing during the pandemic will influence equity and inclusion in the workplace? Is it going to help or hurt that pursuit?
Oh gosh. This is a hard question for me as a planner, especially as a city planner. I know a lot of people might not know what white flight is, but in the 60s and 70s, when similar situations of protesting and economic downfall happened in cities, a lot of white people decided they were going to move out of these cities and take the property tax and tax base out of the cities and leave people of color to deal with the fact that their cities were just on fire. And I fear, to be honest, with this work from home system that we're developing, and I think it's going to stay for the long haul, is that a lot of people that are in these high-level tech spaces that can work from home are going to start moving out of these urban cores. And I think that is the key. And I appreciate Stephen Green's comment about we do need to hire 30, 40, 50, 60, 20, 19 people that are experienced, with tons of experience. And we need to stop telling them that we don't have budgets, or that, we don't have the system, or like check back in a couple of months, or we're in COVID-19, so like we're not necessarily hiring right now. Like, okay, but if you're doing equity work and you only don't have any people that are from those communities, you need to figure it out straight
Yep.
up. Like, you need to figure out how you're going to bring these people into these communities and actually let them to like be participatory in that process, because it's not fair to have a separate society where all the people who can work from home, and then all the people that can't work from home have to like subject themselves to coronavirus, because
Yep.
that's what's happening is right now is that many people of color cannot work from home, and they're having to go out into these urban spaces, work at Fred Meyer, be a delivery driver, be a community planner activist, and they're
Mhm.
subjecting themselves to coronavirus. Everyone else is able to work from home, and they're not subjecting themselves to coronavirus, and they're not going to get sick.
Mhm.
We ask questions on why we see higher rates of coronavirus in communities of color. This is why. It's because of where communities of color are and what we do for work. And so there is such great people in this city, and we need to hire them, especially if they've traditionally not had opportunities to get hired.
Yep. Thank you. Um, I want to acknowledge that this is a ton of emotional labor that you have volunteered to do here for us, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time and having the energy to do so, Quincy. It's been super informative. I hope the audience has learned as much as I have. This is the time where, we've got a group of people here who have just had the advantage of learning from you. What can we as a community be doing to help Quincy right now?
Hire me. No. Selfish plug. Do not have a job, and I have spent the past 8 months trying to find a planning job
Hmm.
and have not gotten past the hiring process, not even an interview. And that's
Hmm.
all my friends too. My family, my youth community, we are struggling, and we are sad, and we are depressed, and we are dealing with college debt, and we have no way to see ourselves to get out of that, because no one will hire us, because they keep telling us go get in more debt, and maybe then we'll hire you, but then you need to get a PhD. So I think like the biggest thing is like, if you have an opportunity in your organization to hire a young person of color, take a chance on them, because they're going to work really, really hard, and they're going to really value that opportunity, and they're going to know how much work and effort you've put in to get them into that organization, and they're gonna be able to sustain themselves, and they're gonna want to continue to work. We're spending so much effort as young people protesting and trying to get people to understand what we deal with.
Hmm.
It'd be awesome for us to be involved, with a seat at the table as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Quincy. Always enjoy spending time with you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
thanks, Rick.
for all of your responses. Thanks to everybody who showed up. Just kind of keep an eye out for more of these crowdcasts. We won't be doing them with quite the regularity we have in the past, but for important topics like this, we're definitely going to make the time to have these conversations. So thank you, Quincy. Talk to you soon.
All right, see you guys later.
Bye.